I'm Bhavedhir V. Bharadwaj. Welcome to episode 25 of Genesis of Tomorrow. The following is a conversation about neuroscience, artificial intelligence, society, and more with Miss Lynn, researcher and PhD candidate in AI at Donders Institute for Brain, Cognition and Behavior in Netherlands. Also, folks, 95.2% of you watching this have not subscribed yet. So if you are able to derive even the slightest bit of value from the show, please support us by clicking that subscribe button so that we can keep improving the quality of the episodes and keep on bringing such wonderful guests over for you. And now, without any further ado, let's get right into it. Enjoy and thank you. We are rolling now. Okay, so first of all, welcome on the show. Thank you for being here. And I told you this before as well that the particular matter of intrigue for me regarding your background is the amalgamation of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. I think it will be really viable for the people who have tuned in. For if we start by laying down a foundational framework of how these two different aspects of science and technology are developing towards an amalgamation.
Yeah. So it's when I started doing neuroscience, I didn't really think I would ever do artificial intelligence in the future. So I did my master's in neuroscience because I was interested in learning about the brain and how the process of learning, works. And then slowly I realized people were using computer models, AI models, to learn, kind of like add a perspective on neuroscience. And I thought it was really interesting. And the more I started using AI or dive into AI, the more I realized it's like becoming a huge field, which they recently start calling like Neuro-AI. So yeah, it's a perfect, um, how do you say it? Like it's two fields coming together, but it's also strengthening each other. Um, yeah, I don't want to make too strong of a claim whether neuro AI is going to be like the next, big field that people will use, in science for a long time, like the field of neuroscience or something like that. But it is very, yeah, promising, and it sounds really exciting. So I just continued doing that. Where the field of AI, where you can make these tools, use these tools to improve your knowledge about the brain, and then the more you learn about the brain, you can also improve the AI algorithms. So, yeah.
To get a better understanding of the field at large, what are the key research areas or areas of development where neuroscience and AI is being implemented or worked upon?
Are we talking about research or industry or both?
I'd say both. Research, academia, but as well as businesses or research and the application end of it as well.
Yeah. So I personally am, um, mainly interested in research, as in I like to apply my curiosity on things, and I don't really think a lot about the applied, effects on society. But I mean, I know for sure it has a lot of effect on. Um, it has a huge impact. But yeah, so top one for me is research. It does have to. And are we talking? Are you asking about the positive impacts or the negative, or like just?
In general, the areas where researchers are currently working in regards to neuro AI.
Yeah, so it has a lot of impact. Um, for one concrete example, we can use AI to, you know, use it as medical devices or develop these medical devices. Um, yeah, if you, for example, have cochlear implants, you can improve the quality of sound or the mapping technology, or cortical implants for um, blind people. You have ChatGPT, obviously, who uh, everyone has access to, or a lot of people have access to, that can use as a tool to either be lazy and generate text for you, or use it to learn more things, or I don't know, you can use it multiple ways. And yeah, AI has a, it's a very general question, because it has yeah, as a researcher, you can also use it to learn about systems. You can kind of like try to
Mm.
mimic behavior of human intelligence. And if you're interested in human intelligence, you can use it to see as a like an input output system, um, and avoid unnecessarily killing more animals, for example, in the research area where, or more specifically, the neuroscience area, where in history people always have been sacrificing or killing animals to learn about the mappings, like the what kind of areas in the brain are responsible for what kind of motor output or visual output or visual perception. And we can use AI to move into that direction, to not have to kill them anymore and build systems and try to understand things. Yeah.
Talk to me about your work in this visual reconstruction of images through brain activity that you were also mentioning in our previous talk. What was the initial motive behind it, and what was the entire journey of the research in this particular regard?
The initial idea is it's, I mean, so you have in neuroscience, in history, you have these people who always try to map these receptive fields, um, trying to understand which area of the brain is responsible for which kind of like lines or locations or features. But before AI was being used to study these methods, there were mainly like Gabor wavelets, or kind of like simple features that we're able to use to, or assumed that the brain carried these very simple lines and edges. By showing these lines and edges to the animal, you can kind of see what neurons are being fired, or what populations of neurons, or what kind of signals would be coming out of the brain. And um, now that we have these advanced AI models with, advanced techniques that people use to study the brain, it's yeah, you can kind of study representations of the brain in a more complex way, rather than just simple assumptions of lines and blobs and edges and colors. So yeah, the initial motivation was, it would be really cool to see what these neurons, what kind of features these neurons carry. And one approach would be to try to reconstruct these neuronal signals or images from these neuronal signals, and then kind of dissect and see what is happening in this process of reconstruction. Um, yeah, that way you can learn more about what is happening. And so, yeah, the second question was how did the process go, right?
Yes, what did you exactly do to study all these brain activity and reconstruct images from it?
So what the technicalities of it. So we have a data set of images and corresponding brain signals, which means either the human participant was watching a movie or images in the fMRI scanner, and the data set is split into testing and training. It's quite simple. So in the testing set, there's no overlapping images with the training set, and then we build a model that is fully convolutional. It's not pre-trained; it's just a lot of convolutional layers that would transform these brain signals to images. So the input of the model would be brain signals, and the output would be images. And if you train it on a huge data set, it will eventually learn to generalize on that particular brain or that data set, and is able to reconstruct testing images as well that have not been seen by the model yet. So, yeah, the field of neural reconstruction is usually so the way that I do it is I was inspired by so this model is basically inspired by end to end models in Japan, where this paper Shen et al. Used a similar technique, but I yeah in this paper we incorporated more like neuroscience inspired theory. For example, the processing of input data using receptive fields. Um, yeah, that allows for the input to be more spatially precise, and it rearranges the input to be more friendly for the convolutional network. But that's yeah, that's technical stuff. Yeah,
What kind of mathematics is going behind the scenes in these
yeah,
artificial intelligence, these neural networks and algorithms that you're using? Because you did tell me that you do not have a mathematical background, right? You
hmm,
pursued biology and neuroscience, pure
yeah.
neuroscience, right? So, what kind of mathematics or computational maths you have to use while you're working in this domain of neuro AI?
Yeah, so um, initially, you don't really need to use a lot of maths in order to build these models because it's basically focused on input output. You construct different layers of convolutional networks that are already basically defined. Um, as in, there are packages, PyTorch, and or MixNet or some kind of framework that allows you to build these models quite easily. Um, so in order to perform this reconstruction method, you don't really need to understand the math, but it is interesting. Like you don't need to understand the math of the convolutional layer, and how exactly a convolutional layer works. But once you build it and you're interested in what is happening and going what is going on during that reconstruction process, um, yeah, there are different approaches to try to make it more interpretable, like visualizing these features or making correlations um, of the features. And another approach, I guess, is to apply maths. But because convolutional layers are very, very nonlinear and very complex, the deeper you go in the network, um, yeah, it's very hard to follow mathematically what is going on. And that's not my field. Like I didn't mathematically try to understand what is going on after each layer of doing the reconstruction. What I was focused on was more building the reconstruction model and visualizing different features. And yeah, but I do think it would be interesting, like an interesting approach to for someone to like dive into the math of convolutional networks.
Okay, but how exactly are these neural signals utilized to produce these visual outputs? Like, what is technically the entire
Neural
thing?
signals, as in the artificial neural signals, or you mean the human neural?
How about both? Taking one at a time. Yeah.
So we have, yeah, I mean, it's very, that's the question we're trying to understand. So visual processing is a very hard task for computers to mimic. Um, our brain is very like it does it very efficiently, and we it doesn't sound hard. Like back then during the early neuroscience times, people really thought, oh, visual task, how hard can it be to look at an image and then understand what's going on or see things and have this percept. But the more you're trying to model it with a computer, the more you realize it's really hard. So yeah, so we're still trying to understand what is happening, and whether you want to approach it from the microscopic view, whether you try to understand what is one neuron doing and then how does it communicate with another neuron, or you're trying to look at like populations and how populations communicate, or you know it there are different approaches, and different zoom ins of into the topic that you can choose to or decide to work on. um, but yeah, in the end, it's I think neuroscientists and neuro AI scientists studying, especially studying vision, kind of have the same goal to just try to answer that question. Um, but in a computer model, it's quite easy to explain. Like, okay, you have pixels that are being represented by numbers, and these matrices of numbers, they're just being generated in the first iteration. It's just a random matrix, and then you use a loss function to kind of like guide the model to output these matrices to form some kind of arrangement of pixels that makes sense for our visual system. And yeah, so that's how a computer basically does it, or humans do it using computer algorithms. So it's very dependent on loss function and yeah, the architecture of the model.
Hmm. These seemingly inherent and automatic processes, may it be in phenomena, may it be cognition or perception, neuroscientists and people in this domain, they study how these work, and then people who are introducing the computational angles to it
Hmm.
try to mimic those with a with algorithms, essentially, to try to certain degrees mimic the human brain, right?
Sorry,
What
can
hmm,
you? I
hmm,
missed what you said. One word.
hmm. uh which part?
Uh, okay, maybe you can repeat your
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, processes and phenomena like cognition,
Mhm.
perception, in general, how our brain works and how things just come to us naturally.
Mhm.
Neuroscientists and people in this field tend to study all of these topics and find answers to them.
Yeah.
People who approach this from a computational angle, they
Hmm.
try to mimic these processes computationally in an
Yeah.
attempt to basically mimic the human brain to whatever extent they can. How would you explain to someone who does not come from the background of the scientific background in
Hmm.
this domain of this domain, how processes of phenomena like cognition and perception, I'm taking these two specifically for now, how they work, and then as a follow up, how computationally we are able to mimic these processes?
So, how does the first question? How does the brain work? Basically.
Primarily.
Okay. Yeah. So it's more like we're trying to answer that. The, so basically, what how I see it is, I'm not trying to mimic a brain, but I'm trying to answer questions and solve problems. Um, and the approach is to kind of, by using things that we know about the brain, some theories that we know from the neuroscience field, um, and apply these into computational models. So I think mimicking is a hard, it's a difficult concept, because at what level are you trying to mimic something? You can mimic it by building like a system that does exactly the same thing as the brain, behavior wise, or neurophysiological wise. Does it carry like membranes or hormones? Or because mimicking the brain is very, yeah, it sounds like a very, very hard, overwhelming task to approach it that way. So, um, in computational neuroscience, there are different approaches, and in Neuro-AI, so people try to. So the main goal is to basically make systems that well, there are different goals. It depends on what your goal is. Um, if your goal is to understand things, then it does make sense to take very small steps and try to make a system that behaves exactly like a brain. Um, but I also think if your goal is to think of an algorithm that is very efficient and very good and expressive, you also want to work towards making something that is similar to the brain, because the brain is very efficient and very good at performing tasks and solving problems. Um, yeah, but it is, still dependent on like the little sub goals that you have within science, or within just generating algorithms. Um, so yeah, I'm a bit sidetracked. um, but people have different goals, and it's also very hard to kind of like, say what everyone's goal is. But if I just focus on my own goal, I want to understand a system, and I also don't want to stick to just one perspective or one method of doing things. So I do kind of like try to approach these questions from different angles. And one of the interesting angle is to build systems that are expressive and interpretable and also efficient. Um, so, by first creating like a base model that performs well, and then incorporating new theories and new components into the model to work towards the goal of making it more efficient and interpretable. Um, yeah, that is a way to kind of build these models, these computational models that would answer my question, hopefully.
I also feel that even though it is a tedious and overwhelming thought when you talk about mimicking the human brain or building the human brain, um, I think we won't be the ones who will be doing that.
Mhm.
We'll be, because that would inherently then demand us to be understanding the entirety of human brain, which I
Yeah.
feel is in itself a very far-fetched notion to think about. But more like with the advances in technologies like artificial intelligence, I feel they would provide a more effective and viable way towards building a system which is very close to the functioning of the human brain.
Hmm.
Like, not essentially the way that our human brain approaches problems, but the input and output aspect of it. You
Hmm.
are the way our brain is provided with input, and then it's able to generate a specific output.
Hmm.
At some point in time, we'll be able to create a comprehensive system which will be just as good, if not better, at being able to generate that output, which to an extent is already happening with artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, LLMs.
Mm, yeah. So I okay. Yeah. So the definition of better is quite relevant in this context because efficiency is a huge thing. You When you're training like ChatGPT, you need a lot of computing power, and still then, I mean, if you I don't know how so if you use a bunch of energy and put it into a human brain, I think it will like become like a super brain. But also the the fact that we're able to interact with the environment as well, and make actual changes into the in the world while we're able to visually perceive things and say things and understand things, and it's a lot of like different things that we can do and not just generate text. Um, but yeah, so it's more like the multi modular thing that the brain can do that also makes it better. And um, yeah, it's I think if we're just focused on one task and then using that as like a measurement of whether an algorithm is good or not good or better than the brain, then we're failing in all looking at all the other aspects that the brain can do. And I mean, sure, maybe in the future, agents like some kind of robots are able to generate text really well and also are able to perceive things really well visually. But that would require a lot of training resources and a lot of energy, electricity that I'm not sure whether that is that it even exists on this earth. Um, so I think we have to like kind of if we're trying to build like smart algorithms and or smart intelligent algorithms, we have to kind of like slow down and think how can we approach this more efficiently mathematically, um, because it does matter what kind of building blocks you use in order to build these systems, and current systems are built on top of other building blocks that already exist and are already determining whether it's efficient or not. So yeah, I think it is important to kind of like slow down and think, are we actually gonna get there with these building blocks that we're using, with the amount of resources that we have on this planet? So yeah, that's just future thinking. But current AI systems are impressive, and they're very useful if you want to use them as some kind of tools. But in order to have some system that will become smarter than a human being, I think we do need to change a lot of fundamental stuff that we're using right now.
I, I think there would also then be, if we achieve that sort of a system which is smarter than a human being in all aspects present, there
Mhm.
would inherently be work put towards put towards making or attempting to make the human brain smarter than those said systems, which will come in the form of brain enhancements. Neuralink is an example of it, a current
Mhm.
field. What currently do you think is the scope of this domain of neurological enhancement through technology?
Yeah. So in order to enhance the something, I think we need to understand it properly first. I mean, you can enhance the brain already without implanting chips or so having needing like direct interactions with the neurons. So I wonder how like what is the use of implanting these chips exactly? Like what? How are we planning on enhancing brains by implanting things into it? We can already control kind of thoughts with particular sound waves or particular uh, visual inputs. Um, yeah, but by having directly interaction with the brain, it's more. I think the goal would be more to enhance things that are that for I can only currently see it like as a huge enhancement for blind people who don't have or Parkinson's disease who lack a particular functionality in their brain that needs support. But even with these chips, trying to help them, it's never gonna work as well as the actual brain itself, because yeah, you need to first understand how these neurons are carrying these very complex tasks, and then try to induce it into the brain, which is very yeah, it requires a lot of research in order to even come close. So I don't see it as an enhancement yet, unless you are lacking that functionality all together, like fully blind, and then you're able to perceive some kind of lights. But even then, are we enhancing things or just like injecting light into someone's vision? And is it distracting? Is it even helpful? Are they even happy with it? So yeah, um, there are a lot of questions whether it's actually enhancement.
Yeah, I think with this again, we'll have to very specifically define the word enhancement,
Yeah.
right? I mean, because enhancing is again a very abstract term in the context that we are utilizing it in. So, even though I think in future, provided that we put sufficient time and resources in it, if it is needed at all, I think we would reach a point where we'll be able to find ways, implant or not, to be able to maybe even just utilize the potential of our brain significantly more than we are right now. Okay, tell me this: are we currently, how much of the brain do we know about the brain in terms of how much of it people are effectively utilizing, and how much potential do people have to make sure that they enhance their neurological functioning? Because neuroplasticity is a thing, but is it infinite, or is there a particular barrier to your ability to adapt your brain?
Um, so I think adaptation in the brain, yeah, it's very interesting. I have no idea whether there are any limitations to how much a brain can adapt. Um, but there's definitely more adaptation happening in the brain than in computers or AI models that we're trying to build. And uh, yeah, in order to enhance the brain eventually, or something that you need to build a system that works and better than the brain in a particular area. But I don't see it as an enhancement necessarily. If you don't use it, if you're gonna use an AI tool, for example, to kind of increase the amount of information that your brain carries, I don't see that necessarily as enhancement, because it's also it could be even like a negative thing, because you're becoming lazy and you're not going to use it yourself, and maybe the brain will think, or some neurons will just die because it thinks, oh, I'm not being used anymore. So then yeah, it's a bit of a weird concept to think whether AI can be used to enhance your brain in the future.
I think,
But
yes, please carry on.
no, what were you going to say?
Yes, I was saying that I think you are completely right in the sense that this utilization of artificial intelligence currently in the form of chat gpt, majorly, right? If we take that as an example, in young children, for example, right? People a few decades back, like as it was with the calculator, the very reason that children are not urged or to utilize calculators for those calculations is not because that it isn't a more efficient way. You can utilize calculators in your college term exams and scientific calculators, right? You do utilize them. But for children who are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age, they need to do that, perform those calculations on their own with their own cognitive ability in order to be able to make sure that those neurons are firing and they are not making their brain redundant
Yeah.
and its ability redundant. I mean, how do you see this in the next 20, 30 years, if we elongate that time span, and if then research is conducted that the brain capacity of children who are children now, uh, to when they are 30, 40 years of age in the next few decades?
Yeah. Um, Yeah, it really depends, of course, on how the children are being constrained, because I think it is important to um, give constraints to children, not just on ChatGPT and AI models, but on the internet in general. I think it's good for children to also play outside, or play in the physical world, um, as well during their neurodevelopmental eras or years, because when you're using all your senses, um, you're making fully use of the or you're allowing your brain to develop in a healthy way. If you are constantly looking at a screen, you will see a representation of the 3D world through a 2D screen. That will already have an impact on your brain development. So, yeah, it depends on the school system, the educational systems, whether there's going to be some constraints and how they're going to make use of computers to teach children, and the parents, whether they're going to allow the children to use ChatGPT all the time as a friend. It could impact children in so many ways that we can't even think of right now. Maybe their imagination, their um, curiosity. Yeah, it has the potential to do a lot of have a lot of impact on neurodevelopment. Um, so yeah, it is important to take care of that, or to kind of like monitor that.
I mean, surely dependency, over dependency upon technology, especially artificial intelligence, is detrimental. But
Yeah,
it also leads to a point that you mentioned right now, a decrease in one-on-one physical human to human interactions.
yeah,
What sort of a what sort of an impact, detrimental, I'd assume, it has on individuals? Because there's this, again, this argument that if an AI model has passed the Turing test, which means that you cannot identify it as a human or non-human just by conversing with it, then why does it matter if I'm talking to ChatGPT or my chatbot friend instead of an actual friend, making actual friends or relations?
yeah. Well, there's also so many other things that come with talking to friends, right? You hang out with friends, and um, you experience things together, and you. So, I mean, there is some kind of connection that can arise from talking to ChatGPT, and um, there are differences in the connections between a robot and a human, and um, yeah, biological humans can, you know, they make mistakes, but different types of mistakes, and then AI models, they also make mistakes, but if you forget that it is, yeah, you kind of like, there's like, it's weird because you kind of think AI, if you're not knowledgeable on, or if you don't really understand how this AI model is built, you kind of easily can assume that it's a very all-knowing being, or it knows more than you, or it knows more than all of your friends. um, so it's kind of like a mystery of what exactly are you talking to, what how are you supposed to like think of this, how are you supposed to feel about this AI model I mean, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, but I think it's a very interesting, it would be a very interesting research to kind of compare the differences of these connections. But I would prefer to rely or kind of like rely my friendship or connections more on human beings, because AI systems are built by humans that I don't know, and I don't know who built them, but if they have like, you never know if they have some kind of intentions to control your brain or like have an impact or manipulate your way of thinking. They could, because they could like put subliminal things in there, um, and you just have, it could be like a huge group of people, um, spending a lot of resources on trying to give the AI system some kind of like power to affect your way of thinking. So yeah, I don't think we should trust a AI system as we could trust like a friend or something like that. But yeah, it could
I
go in
think
different ways.
for a child, it won't really matter to them in the present, but as they grow up and they invariably venture into the real world to whatever extent that they have to, that is when the problems would start to arise. Like
Hmm.
then it won't just be a choice that you're making to stick with your chatbot friend. It would be more of a situation where you won't be able to make human connections even if you want to.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I mean that, and then that itself will bleed into all other domains and areas of your life. I mean, your workplace, you cannot work with people if you do not know how to maintain personal rapport and connections with them.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is definitely one aspect of the situation. But how do you see the society evolving? Because I mean, it has started to evolve at a very exponentially high and fast paced rate. And with the evolution of artificial intelligence itself as a technology, combined with other advancements in other sciences and technologies,
Hmm.
how do you think the society and humanity in general is progressing forward?
Um, yeah, that is a task that I don't really. um, yeah, so it's interesting because the past, during my PhD, I always just focus on engineering, doing things like generating things, reconstructing things, building things, and the technical stuff. And it's very easy to kind of like push away that perspective of how society is going to be impacted by things, because you're so focused on this, very you're so deep into the rabbit hole of building things that, and try to improve things and try to apply your questions and try to answer your questions, and it becomes like a very narrow tunnel that you go through in order to answer these questions, um, which is not a bad thing, because in order to answer very complex questions, you kind of need to isolate yourself from all the other distractions, and um, in order to focus on very like complex, solve problem solving, um, you just, yeah, need to throw away all the other perspectives. Otherwise, it becomes very hard to continue. And so I haven't really thought a lot about the impact that society would have. But I think it's very important that we kind of like listen to other people as well. And um, because people from the outside can see that AI scientists are building these models that kind of like can trick you and behave like a human being. And I can imagine it's really scary and um, intimidating if you have no idea what's going on and you just see the output. Um, but from my perspective, it's there are a lot of different hurdles that AI is currently going through, or the field, the engineers in the field of AI is going through. And um, for example, computational power, um, very, it's something that is also impacting society, but also constraining AI models to become as smart as people are scared of it becoming. So yeah, there are different aspects that we can uh, think of that has an impact on society, and people are also scared, which is very valid, to that people will make use of AI in a bad way, like use it as weapons or something. And yeah, there are a lot of valid fears, um, but yeah, so I think the nice thing about this large community is that everyone has their own thing that they care about, and eventually people will focus on different things to keep AI somewhat safe, but also develop the technology in hopefully a more efficient way. And yeah, it all depends on what people care about in the end.
I really like to, oversimplify it to in terms of using AI like Tony Stark uses his Jarvis, but not uh, letting yourself be engulfed by it to the extent where it turns into Ultron. Are you aware? Have you seen Avengers movies?
No.
Right, the references would just flow over your head. Then I'm so sorry, I didn't know that. Okay,
It's
but yes. Uh, how do you think utilizing these AI tools in your research process, to what ways has that influenced the entire research process for researchers, and what are the pros and cons of that?
yeah, so AI tools in research. Um, I'm specialized in neuroscience research, so I'm only gonna, I guess, talk about the AI tools in neuroscience. Um, a lot of things, have changed since AI have brought into neuroscience. Well, AI, I mean like computational models in general. Um, so yeah, before AI or computational neuroscience was very popular. It was more like focused on, how do you say it, in vitro, like or not even in vitro, but you have these stem cell kind of, or cell kind of studies where people look at the brain under a microscope, see the anatomy of the neurons, and um, also dissect brains from mice and see how, I mean, people are still doing that, um, but before, like, using any computational models, it was more like performing lesions in cats or mice, and then see how that affects the behavior of that particular animal, which is kind of, you know um, part of history. It happened, and from that we have like papers that we can build, or knowledge that we can build our models upon. I don't know if there were other ways to do this, whether people could have done neuroscience in a different way, but this is how it used to go. And um, we found, receptor fields were part of an important thing. So neurons are always firing at the same location, or firing, like particular neurons are always firing whenever there's like stimuli at the same location, or complexity of features. If you show like a face to uh, a biological, like either animal or a human, always the same neurons would fire. Um, yeah, so when AI, and so when I started like transitioning from using only neuroscientific techniques to also using I realized, yeah, the AI models, even though they're not exactly like the brain, because we're just building components that we hope kind of behave like brains, but it does add a lot of different tools that we can now use, um, and avoid unnecessary, um, invasive invasive tasks on animals. Um, but we also are able to kind of mathematically, like, try to match mathematical, um, or try to explain things mathematically, um, using computational algorithms, without computationally computational aspect of in neuroscience. It's very hard to mathematically describe things. I mean, it's still not a perfect way to do neuroscience, or to it's not a it's not a there's a lot of constraints in using computers to study the brain, because computers are just built, um, with things that we don't really, like. When when you're doing computational neuroscience, everything needs to be correct. Like, you can't use, for example, you have like infinite concept of infinity in the physics world or in the math world. You can't really simulate that in a computer, or there are some other things that you can't simulate in a computer that would somehow describe, the physical world. But it is an approach, and it is a safe, kind of like a safe approach, um, because you don't have to kill brains, or you don't have to kill, like, you don't have to like go into brains, but it's also not necessarily like mm, the most, yeah. There's still a lot of like constraints in studying it, because you still have to kind of align these computer models with the actual brain, and that's a really hard task. And it's never going to be, I don't think it's ever going to be perfect, because of the nature of computers and the nature of, I guess, nature. It's the atoms, and or whatever nature is consist of, is not the same as what computers are consisted of.
What about consciousness? It's one of those other key aspects that people are trying to wrap their heads around. What entails consciousness? What is it? How much do we know about it?
Whew. Yeah. um, Consciousness, there are different aspects of, you know uh, things about our brain that we can kind of like think, oh, this is probably something that separates us from, other animals, or even like, yeah, for example, creativity or humor. I don't know. It's We're just making use of words to describe like some things that we don't even know what it means. So, how do you define creativity, or how do you define um, something that is complex or something? There are a lot of like words that we thought we know it exists. We know that there's a difference between um, some animals and human beings, but it's really hard to even pinpoint what that is. So I think in order to define what consciousness or whatever what that means, um, we first should like kind of be able to define all these small um, factors that separates us from other animals or computer systems, which is really hard.
One, okay, when we talk about, it's different from consciousness, but when we talk about conscious and subconscious mind, like, it is merely a philosophical concept or matter, or is there evidence, neurological evidence of what a conscious mind is, what a subconscious mind is, how it works?
um, Evidence. So yeah, um, to be honest, I'm not really. I don't know, but there are talks of, yeah, how what does it mean, and I mean, for example, you have like some some animals that would look in the mirror and they don't realize that it's them. They just think, oh, that's just another. I don't know what they think, but um, some people. So that's very psychology theories, I think, which I haven't really thought about, but yeah, consciousness, I think, is made up of a lot of different factors. If you just look at it from a neurophysiological standpoint, there are neurons, but there are also um, oscillations of neurons, and there are also individual communications between neurons, and there are also neurons that create specific behavior that allows you to have like a motor output and grab something with your hand or change something that again will give you some kind of feedback signal that you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong, or not right or wrong but just something. So it's there are a lot of different aspects that contribute to consciousness. I think a lot of neurophysiological aspects, and in order to basically find that in a computer system, it will require more than just one aspect of talking, generating text. It will also, I think, require an agent that has some mechanisms that allows the agent to grab things and change things and gain these feedback signals, and also have emotions, like some kind of representation of emotion in hormones or oscillations and in the brain. Yeah, that.
For somebody wanting to get into neuro AI, what are the key aspects that you would recommend them to be thorough and well versed in?
Mm, oh, it's very hard because getting into neuro AI also, neuro AI is built. It's a system, right? So a lot of people who work in neuro AI have determined how things work. Neuro AI is quite so. I personally have only been in the research side, so I um, can only give advice on that, I guess. So Neuro AI's research side has uh, has this whole system where you publish papers and then you write, or yeah, you do your research, you write a paper, you publish it, it gets peer reviewed, and so the best thing, and it's moving really fast, so you should be able to keep up with the pace, and read the newest developments, be motivated to read all these newest things, and it feels different than the other sciences, because the other sciences has like very like, old things that you can cite and still be relevant, and in neuro AI you still it's still new, so you kind of want to develop your own questions, and you want to develop your own focus because it's such a big field. You also want to really think about what you want to answer and what you want to which direction you want to go to and what perspective you want to look at it from and what kind of tools you want to use in order to answer your questions. But that is less of a personal advice. It's more like I think that would help the neuro AI field a lot if people are more like take responsibility and think more about what they want to answer and why they're doing things that they do. And for personal development in the neuro AI field, I mean, it's the same. I think if you want to genuinely do good research, you want to kind of stay open to all the new changes and new ideas and new things that come at you, but you also want to develop your own critical thinking. So you also want to be able to defend your position and think of why you're doing the things that you're doing. Yeah.
There's this final segment that we do on the show. Miss Lynn, what is your word to humanity?
Oh no. Oh, word to humanity. Uh, um, just stay curious. I think. Yeah, like a child, you know, when you're when you're a child, you are born curious and you see all the beauty in the world, and as you grow older, you might get distracted by all the serious stuff and all the things, responsibilities that people are trying to get you to do. So I think it's important to just don't forget your inner child, stay curious, have fun with science, have fun with whatever you're doing. Yeah, that.
Miss Lynn, thank you so very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
I'm very, very confident that people who will be turning in will be able to take back something new and novel that they might have learned from this particular episode. So, thank you so very much for being on the show.
Thank you for doing this podcast. It's, yeah, good job.